Oh, what is going on, everyone in the internet? This is another edition of Flobo Saw It on Netflix. This is the show where I go deep into the archives of the Netflix library to talk about original shows, series, and all that jazz. Now, usually I do this show offline. I do this show basically a private video and I upload it whenever I feel like it. And probably get a couple of views, but this is kind of the few times I'm doing it live. Before I do the review today of The Harder They Fall, I just want to give a big shout out to everyone who's been watching or listening to Flobo Saw It on Netflix. You see, I just came up with the show idea one frustrated afternoon where I was planning to be on a show and the show got canceled. And I said, wait, my camera's ready to go. I have things to talk about. So I wanted to make this a possibility. So I want to give a shout out to everyone who's listening on the audio version. We're talking all over the world. Shout out to New Zealand. Shout out to Sweden. Shout out to Luxembourg. You guys make this show a thing, which is pretty cool, right? If you guys are not familiar with this show, we have all the other episodes on right here on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/FloboBoys, or you can listen to your favorite podcast app. We're talking Spotify is my podcast app of choice, but I am no means trying to evangelize. You can on Stitcher, on Spreaker, on iTunes/Apple Podcasts, Flobo Saw on Netflix, a member of the New Amsterdam Entertainment Network. And if you want to know more about the Entertainment Network, newamsterdam.com, KNWAmsterdam.com. Also, become a member of the Boisterous Crew. That's our Patreon. Patreon.com/FloboBoys. That is the Boisterous Crew. Unlock bonus content. Let's say you love this show. You know that every month, members of the Patreon get a bonus episode of this very show, of Flobo Saw It on Netflix. This time we talk about stand-up comedy specials once a month on that Patreon. It's only get that to be a member of the Boisterous Crew. Patreon.com/FloboBoys. Let's talk about it. So usually I have this long list of things I want to check out on my Netflix queue, and it gets longer and longer and longer the more time I do it. What up, Will 5 Stud Muffin? I'm just here talking about the movie The Harder They Fall, and that's what happened. I got a email from Netflix saying, hey, look, this is a movie you may like. It's called The Harder They Fall. It is a Western, a neo-Western featuring an all-black cast based on your previous viewing habits. You'll enjoy it. And plus, since the last movie I reviewed, Space Sweeper, put a little bad taste in my mouth, I was down to talk about it. So here's the deal about me and Westerns. Born and raised in New York City, Brooklyn, New York, didn't get it. Never understood what Westerns were. Never understood the genre. I thought they were just might as well be science fiction. My dad, however, he was an immigrant, a prospective American. The idea of this kind of romanticized traveling the wild terrain and drinking coffee out of tin cups and fighting, shooting guns was his thing. He loved Bonanza. He loved John Wayne movies. To me, I never got it. In fact, when I got to be a writer, when I went to film school, I went to graduate school, I was getting my master's degree in filmmaking. That's why I do the show. I started to write Westerns, not because I loved them, but because I hated them. I wanted to make a Western in my image. I didn't quite understand. In fact, if you're on Amazon right now, check out High Desert Run, a book I wrote. It's a neo-Western, basically a Western set in modern day. So when Netflix said, you'll love The Harder They Fall, I was a bit skeptical. But I tell you, not bearing the lead here, I tell you, I liked it a lot. But before I tell you why I did, I just want to give a bit of the ratings breakdown. Rotten Tomatoes has it certified fresh at 88%, but IMDb has it at a 5.4 out of 10. That's very rare to have two different reviews to be that wide in difference in ratings. You know, sometimes it's like 1 point in between, sometimes it's about 2, but 88% on Rotten Tomatoes, 5.4 on IMDb. I was kind of like, ugh, I don't know what it is. But here's the thing. I liked it for what it was, and we'll go to that why it is. Written and directed by Jeymes Samuel and co-written by Boaz Yankin, who was famous for writing The Prince of Persia, Sands of Time, and The Second Dirty Dancing. I didn't really know what to expect when it comes to the kind of Western we're going to get, because the genre is very rich. You have like comedies like Maverick, you have serious epics like Tombstone, or you have action comedies like Wild Wild West. Didn't get it at all. But what I saw was a film that was inspired by the gory Quentin Tarantino movies, which were in turn inspired by the Italian spaghetti westerns, like the Clint Eastwood movies, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars. And those spaghetti westerns were influenced by what Italians thought the American West was. And so it kind of became this crazy circle. What up, Charlene? This is a live edition of Flobo on Netflix. Yeah, if you have questions about it, let me know what you think. So I was definitely intrigued about this. Also, on top of that, we talk about writing to a genre. The characters in this film, even though it's a majority black cast, are real. The story is completely fictional. It's historically inaccurate, but there's a list of people in here that I actually had to write down to see if they existed. Cherokee Bill, for example, was one of those. The Rufus Buck Gang was one of them. Bass Reeves, Nat Smith. Trudy is another one. Don't worry, Charlene, it's not a spoiler edition. It's totally non-spoiler. But let me know if any Westerns you like, Charlene, in the chat. We'll definitely talk about that as well. So this a lot of times reminds me of the movie Red Tails. I'm not sure if you remember this one, but Red Tails is another movie that has a predominantly black cast, but it pulls from a lot of the lore of the Tuskegee Airmen and other World War II fighters, where the story is completely fictional. It's wholly inaccurate, but there's enough tendrils of history that makes you want to research, which is kind of cool. Because as someone of color, I'm kind of burnt out of stories about the struggle. I know I'm struggling, but I want to see heroes that aren't forced. I want to see heroes with their own stories. But I understand Bass Reeves was something I saw in another show called Timeless. To see another audition of that character or that individual today was pretty cool. Charlene says she's been watching a lot of documentaries lately. That's kind of my bread and butter. We've covered some documentaries on the audio version of Flobo on Netflix, and the only Western she can think of is 100 Ways to Die or whatever by Seth MacFarlane. Oh yeah, Once Upon a Time in the West, I think it's something like that, right? I think that was more of a Western comedy. So, like I'm saying, you have this big dumb movie. I'm putting dumb in air quotes because it's not supposed to be historically accurate. It's not supposed to be as it was in the West, but it gives you a romanticized, heroic version of these characters to make you go, wait, was that real? Was that not real? Let me go check it out. So I think to that point, it really does serve a purpose. It's a very cool on-ramp for someone who doesn't like Westerns. I think that was the point. You have a genre that has been considered inaccessible for lots of people, myself included. And now you have yourself a pop edition of this. And the soundtrack is hip-hop, reggae, some R&B as well, even some throwbacks to turn of the century call and response music as well. When I was a kid, there was a movie by Mario Van Peebles. It was called Posse. And if you remember Posse, that movie was famous for two things. One, it was a Western featuring a predominantly black cast. But two, it was a delays of that film. The album was out for like months before the film had dropped, to the point where when it did drop, it was kind of like too late. It already had passed its moment in the zeitgeist. This one was interesting. But the first drop of the opening sequence, which I'll get to in a second, the song that plays is available today on Spotify. That will give you a chance to check it out. So you can really have a bit of a companion piece and listen to the liner notes or re-listen to some of the songs that are featured in the movie. As part of that throwback to that Western style, I, for one, love opening sequences. I love opening sequences in TV shows. I love opening sequences in movies. I feel like those things are kind of just undone. No one does those anymore. It's a little title design, man, but I got myself a full song with imagery that got me into the world. The opening sequence was gory enough, but the opening sequence with the music and the credits rolling going, okay, I'm now going to get myself transported to a world I know is rough, raw, in my face, not historically accurate, but operating at a certain energy level that's going to pretty much fulfill your needs for people who are not familiar with that genre. And so I thought it was pretty cool. I thought about how Posse was, how it could have been that kind of movie 25 years ago, but I do think this one doesn't. Individual performances were pretty good. I loved my boy Delroy Lindo. Delroy Lindo was actually sometimes people say that when I mention my dad in stories, they think of Delroy. So it's kind of cool to see my fake dad with a mustache. Charlene continues. She says theme songs for TV is almost non-existent now. And I actually agree with this. I think theme songs are such an underrated device to really get you in the mood. I remember when I was a kid and back when everyone watched TV around the same time, at 8 o'clock on a Thursday, on my block who was watching Martin and who was watching Friends based on what loud TV sounds were going. The fact there's a skip button on Netflix kind of breaks my heart. I watch every single opening sequence. And besides, you can get an Emmy for that. Sidebar, Flobo fact, I'm not sure the name of the show that won this year's Emmy in title design, but I DJ'd that guy's wedding. It was pretty cool. I was like, hey, you won an Emmy for best title design. It's something that is kind of overlooked. Sidebar, not quite a Western, but a cool title design is Casa de Mi Padre, which was a Will Ferrell movie, which is supposed to be a comedy thing. But I thought, for what it was a good title sequence. So the runtime of this one, a little over 2 hours. I was said in my last review, 2 hours and change videos are going to be the norm. You're not going to get that 90-minute movie anymore. You're not going to get that 100-minute movie anymore. If they want to present to you a story that's considered rich, it's going to be 2 hours to get your money's worth. I'm fine with this one. The subjective time is a bit better, which means I didn't feel like it dragged as much as it did. I personally would have cut 10 minutes, but then I'm speaking from my experience as a film school graduate with a degree in editing. I always want to look at the film like uncut cloth to find out to make things tighter. But that said, there were certain scenes I know had other directors covered it, not in a bad way. They're probably would have stretched out sometime. There's a scene where a train is on a track and it gets stopped by something on the tracks, and I won't go into why because we're a non-spoiler edition this time around. I feel like if that was a Wes Anderson or a Tarantino, that would be stretch a lot longer to add more tension there. Not saying it's a bad thing, not saying it's a good thing, just something I noticed when it comes to when this film is in a genre we associate with other people. So again, I dug it. I thought it was pretty cool. It was a lot of fictional characters being presented in this larger-than-life story. It is gory as heck. There are all kinds of blood squibs. There are all kinds of things. It is not a movie you want to watch with your kids. Now, when it comes down to what kind of person would appreciate this movie, Western aficionados will probably dig that. Action movie fans would do it too. But I think one of the points of this film is that we've never really associated people of color in the West in a way where it does not seem exploitive or doesn't seem as like this weird upside down world. Everyone in this world is kind of understood that it just happens to be people of color hanging out. And in fact, there's only like 2 scenes where there's white people in this entire movie. If I could be so frank, I could be so crass. And it's played as a plot device each time. So it's kind of a cool thing to see. Again, not historically accurate, not even a chance, but it does encourage you to read up on the subject. And yeah, I actually agree with you, Charlene. When it comes to movies now, especially with the Netflix generation, it's either super tight and short, like 90 minutes, or it goes on forever and ever and ever. 2-hour movies is great because you can plan it. I think I grew up in the TV movie era where you said, hey, movie starts at 8, it ends at 10, time for the news. And I think movies should be 2 hours. I personally, to me, 1 hour, 40 minutes, the sweet spot, but I'll take a 2-hour movie. But I don't know if you guys saw The Irishman. That one clocks in at 3.5 hours, and that is just egregious. Produced by Jay-Z, this one is The Harder They Fall. That's why the soundtrack has a bit of an urban flavor. I'm sure he had a hand in the soundtrack. He was on the opening sequence track. I just want to say had this movie came out 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I was in school, I think I probably would have been a different kind of fan of the Western genre. Before I get out of here, I just want to say super shout out to Lakeith Lee Stanfield. His character, Cherokee Bill, was just exquisite. Totally played the highs and lows. I was on the journey. Didn't feel like he was acting. I saw him a couple of years ago in a movie, which you should see, called Sorry to Bother You. This is a totally different interpretation of what he can do in his range. Bright things in that brother's future. That does it for me, man. This is Flobo on Netflix, where I periodically talk about movies in the Netflix canon. Let me know what you think of The Harder They Fall. And if you haven't already, go back and check out all the other episodes right here on YouTube or on the audio version. That does it for me. Let me know what you want me to review next time on Flobo on Netflix.